GFO application and our next steps. So we'll go ahead and start through some grounding slides to kind of get us started. On the screen here, you'll see kind of your controls for Google Meet. So just again, be mindful of your microphone button in particular. We want to make sure everybody's on mute just because we have a pretty big group here today to eliminate any background noise. There's also the camera button. If you want to be on camera, that's great. If you don't, that's also great. You'll also see closed captioning, so the box with the 2 C's in it. Just note that those are auto-generated or computer-generated recordings of us, so they might be slightly off. But we also want to remind you all that we cannot have any AI-generated note-taking or other things in our meeting today. So if we do see anything that is an AI-generated note-taker of sorts, we'll go ahead and remove them from the meeting. Another thing to note, there's a reaction button, there's a share screen. I'm sharing my screen today, so just try to avoid that. We'll try to have some time for question and answers at the end, so be mindful of that raise hand feature. It looks like a hand there, so we'll look for those hands towards the end as questions come up. But we do ask that you please wait until the end. We might cover that question you have throughout today's presentation, so you can just hold off on those questions or populate them in the chat as they come up for you. The other thing to note here in particular is the chat feature. That's the box with the 3 lines in it. If you do have questions or comments that you'd like to share, you could put those in the chat. Just note that this is a public chat. There is no private messaging in Google Meet, so whatever you put in the chat, everybody's going to see that. And there's some other controls if you need those as necessary. All right, so we're going to start with some more formalized grounding documents and statements here to kind of ground us in our work. We're going to start with our land acknowledgement statement, and I'll read this aloud for accessibility purposes. And that is, we acknowledge the lands and waters now known as Maryland are the home of its first peoples, the Accohonic Indian Tribe, Assateague Peoples Tribe, Cedarville Band of Piscataway Indians, Choptico Band of Indians, Lenape Tribe, Nanticoke Tribe, Nasu-Wawash Band of Indians, Piscataway Conoy Tribe, Piscataway Indian Nation, Pocomoke Indian Nation, Susquehannock Indians, Yakuganey River Band of Shawnee, and tribes in the Chesapeake watershed who have seemingly vanished since the coming of colonialism. We acknowledge that this land is now home to other tribal peoples living here in diaspora. We acknowledge the forced removal of many from the lands and waterways that nurtured them as kin. We acknowledge the degradation that continues to be wrought on the land and waters in pursuit of resources. We acknowledge the right of the land and waterways to heal so that they can continue to provide food and medicine for all. We acknowledge that it is our collective obligation to pursue policies and practices that respect the land and waters so that our reciprocal relationship with them can be fully restored. Next here is our equity and justice statement, and that is the arts celebrate our state's diversity, connect our shared humanity, and transform individuals and communities. The Maryland State Arts Council is committed to advancing and modeling equity, diversity, accessibility, and inclusion in all aspects of our organization and across communities of our state. MSAC and its grantees are committed to embracing equity and non-discrimination regardless of race, religious creed, color, age, gender expression, sexual orientation, disability, class, language, and/or ability. The vision of the State Arts Council plays an essential role ensuring every person has access to the transformative power of the arts. And we do this through our mission, which advances the arts in our state by providing leadership that champions creative expression, diverse programming, equitable access, lifelong learning, and the arts as a celebrated contributor to the quality of life for all the people of Maryland. Next on our screen here are the pillars and goals of the State Arts Council's current strategic plan. And those pillars are access, awareness, connection, equity, and leadership. Next here are our creative meeting actions. I'm going to read these aloud, but just some things to keep in mind as we're in the space today. We're a big group. You're going to hear a lot from Laura and myself, but also just some things to keep in mind when we get into questions and answers and utilizing the chat as well. So some things to keep in mind: celebrate being in the space with other creative people, engage with everyone's presence as a gift, acknowledge that together we know a lot, enter the conversation with curiosity and inquiry, share your idea and trust that it will be heard, use I statements, focus your language on the task at hand, hold one another accountable with care, honor all perspectives and build on shared ideas, and balance speaking with listening. The next couple slides are just some info slides here that the State Arts Council continues to offer professional development. And those show up in ways like information sessions like we're on today to really dig into our grant programs to make sure we can highlight guidelines and rubrics and all of those things, big changes like we'll experience in the GFO, but really to give a good understanding of each program. We also have topic-specific sessions, and we welcome kind of our partner organizations to come in to help lead those. Coffee with the Council, which is being held like once or twice a month, it seems, on Tuesday mornings at 9 a.m. And those can sometimes be topic-specific, and sometimes it's really the conversation is generated out of who shows up to that particular coffee. We've also been holding office hours in person across the state. We've completed 10 this calendar year. So we're done for 2025, but we're working on our schedule for 2026. So we're trying to hit up different areas, different counties across the state throughout the year. And also just note here the State Arts, or the Maryland Arts Summit, which is coordinated by our friends at Maryland Citizens for the Arts. But just some notes here: if you have some ideas, you can feel free to share those at the link provided here. You'll find whatever's being offered currently through our Eventbrite page. So where you signed up to join this session, you can, I'm sure you saw other things that were being offered ahead. So just some things to keep in mind here for your further learning and connection here at the State Arts Council. Additionally, there's another way to get involved, and that is through panelists and editor service. You'll hear about those two groups today a little bit more as it relates to the GFO program, but we really rely on a diverse array of constituents from across the state to give input in a variety of ways. So that is through panelist service, which those folks review. They may or may not score applications now. Depends on the program. So there is currently a call for our GFO panelists right now that is due at the end of the month. So if you want to dig in a little bit more and review some applications and do some site visits, we'll talk about that a little further, but that application is open. Editors also give input on program policies. You'll hear about editors and how they were involved in the revision program of the GFO program a little bit more. But again, this is there's scheduled public calls on our website through the Ways to Get Involved page. You would apply in Smart Simple, which is our grant portal. For depending on each program, you'll get specific training and support from program directors. And the most important piece here is that you are compensated for your service, and that also is dependent on each program and time and requirements of each program. So moving into more of the content of today, we're going to spend some time of a quick review of the GFO program, talk about the eligibility guidelines. We're going to do a quick overview of the revision process that happened throughout FY25. We'll go through the full application process, talk about the timeline, next steps, funding formula, a little overview around Smart Simple, and then hopefully we'll have some time for Q&A at the end. All right, and I'm going to hand it over to Laura to do the overview.
All right, good morning, everyone. Thanks again for joining us. So glad to see so many familiar names and also some new names here this morning. So just to jump right in here to our Grants for Organizations overview. So Grants for Organizations, we call that GFO for short. You're going to hear that a lot today. Just to note that this presentation, it's an overview of the GFO revision process along with a focus on the full FY27 application. So those are kind of the two components that we're really going to be focusing on today. If you're not already in the GFO program, or if your intent to apply application was not accepted, you wouldn't be eligible to submit an FY27 application at this time. So we have really a specific group that are able to submit that full application. So if you're not sure if you fall into that category or you're unclear, definitely check in with us afterwards before you move on to any kind of application. So if you're not familiar with the GFO program, just very briefly, it's the program, it's our largest funding program. It provides operating support that strengthens and sustains Maryland's arts infrastructures. So basically, we're looking at general operating support. In the current fiscal year, FY26, we awarded over $18 million in GFO funding to over 300 organizations across the state of Maryland. So one of the very first things to point out, and a very important thing, and this is a bit of a change, is that for the FY27 cycle application, all of the applications for FY27 funding, all GFO applications are going to be due on Saturday, November the 15th at 11:59 p.m. So there's no longer an on year versus an off year. If you're familiar with the GFO program, you know that terminology from the past. Now, all of the applications are due on November 15th. So make sure you mark that on your calendar. It's always going to be due on November 15th moving forward. One thing to point out here is that, yes, this is a Saturday this year. That's the way the calendar fell. So it is on a Saturday. Technical assistance is not going to be available after normal business hours. And for myself and Emily, normal business hours, that's typically Monday through Friday from about 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. So on Saturday, we're not going to be around. So since this is a new application and a new process, we highly encourage you to submit a few days early. So think about, just setting that deadline internally in your mind to a date a few days early, since there's not going to be any assistance on the 15th. We don't want you to run into issues that can't be solved, so make sure you're considering that when you're making your plans and making your schedule. So looking at the GFO eligibility and the use of funds here. So there's kind of two different categories that that applicants fall into. One is going to be the arts organizations, looking at general operating grants. So the arts organizations, that's going to be nonprofit organizations whose purpose is producing or presenting the arts through public programs or services. These are going to be your typical arts organizations. So we're looking at, the art museums, the orchestras, the galleries, the theaters, the organizations where arts are the primary focus, and they're centered in your mission. There is also another category called arts programs. These are organizations whose primary purpose is other than producing or presenting the arts, but who provide ongoing public arts activities through public programs. So the mission of these organizations might not specifically be about the arts, but they do have ongoing arts programs. So examples of this might be community centers, places of worship, non-arts museums, libraries, schools such as universities and colleges, those types of things where it's not, the arts aren't the center of what they do, but they have a significant program that has that ongoing sustained programming that is arts focused. And we have a new feature in Smart Simple to help you know if you are an arts program or an arts organization. So now when if you log into your Smart Simple account and you begin a Grants for Organizations GFO application, under one of the first tabs on that application, the Organization Information tab, you're actually going to see some pre-populated information. And there's a screenshot here on the screen. The very first thing that's going to be pre-populated there is GFO Arts Organization or Arts Program. In this example here on the screen, you can see that it says it's an arts organization. If it was a program, it would say it's a program. But this just helps to distinguish, which one you are. So that way you know exactly what we're looking at. Most of the time applicants know the difference, but sometimes it can be a bit confusing. So this just helps us to really lock it in there so you can see it on the screen which one you are. If you see something and you think that it's incorrect or you're confused over that designation, definitely reach out to us so we can double check and make sure everything's correct. And then of course we can clarify any information as well. So thinking about who can apply to GFO, like I said a few slides ago, just a reminder that in order to submit this full application, you must already be a part of the GFO program, which means that you have either previously been funded through GFO in the last fiscal year or through the intent to apply process that happened in the past couple of weeks, you are invited to complete a full application. If you don't fall into either of those categories, you would not be able to submit the full application. But assuming that you do, you would need to be an arts organization or program, which means you must be a 501c3 nonprofit, a unit of government, or a school. We also do accept fiscal sponsorships under a Model A agreement. Again, that's probably something that you already know about. If you fall into that category, you know that you have that fiscal sponsorship set up. But if you have questions about that, or if you're not sure if you meet the qualifications as a Model A agreement, you can feel free to reach out to us so we can double check that everything is in alignment before you move forward. You must also be incorporated in Maryland as a nonprofit or have a significant physical presence in Maryland. And you also have to have operated as an arts organization or program for one full fiscal year and be able to submit a financial statement for that most recently completed year at the time of application. One thing to just kind of know about, again, this has already been taken care of either through the intent to apply process or because you've been previously funded through GFO, is that the allowable income threshold has changed through this revision process. So in the past, it used to be $50,000. That was the minimum requirement to be a part of the GFO program. It has lowered to $10,000. We'll talk very briefly about some of these changes later on, but that's just sort of for awareness that we have changed that threshold. The GFO program, the funding that you would receive through it, what it can support is really your general operations. So this is really looking at your day-to-day expenses to run your arts organization or your arts program. This is not project-specific support. So you're not naming one specific project. This is supporting your ongoing programming and operations to keep your organization up and running. So some of those expenses that might support are things like programming materials and supplies, marketing and promotional activities, personnel and associated expenses, your operations like your rent or your mortgage, your utilities, your internet, those things that you just need for day-to-day business. And also professional development activities can be supported as well. There are just a few things that very specifically the GFO funding cannot support. So just to kind of make note of those when you're thinking about your funding, it cannot support re-granting or scholarships. It cannot support capital improvements. We have an entire arts capital program that is dedicated specifically to that. It cannot support activities that are not open to the public, and it cannot support activities that are primarily therapeutic in nature. Additionally, it cannot support travel outside of Maryland. And as with any MSAC grant funds, the funds cannot be used for any sort of political contributions or things that are political in nature. If you're not sure about the use of the funds and how you're planning to use them, just reach out and double check with us, make sure everything is allowable and eligible. And of course, you can also check the guidelines for more specifics as well. All right, so with that kind of basic information, I'm going to pass it over to Emily to talk about the revision process.
Great, thanks, Laura. Just to start here, a quick note that we did have a previous session that outlined the full editing process. So we're going to do a quick overview of it for today's purposes so we can spend more time in the application and next steps. But if you are interested in learning more, maybe you didn't catch that particular session, there is a recording of it. It's called the GFO Revision Process and Application Webinar Recording, and it took place on September 9th. So just take a look at that if you want to go into more detail around the revision process. But for a quick overview here, we went into an editing process because Laura and I, we've overseen the GFO program and the Creativity Grant program as well since 2019. Based on what we were hearing from folks and experiencing, through applicants, panelists, just kind of general overview over the years, we recommended a public editing session and process throughout fiscal year 25 to address some of these overarching and persistent issues that we were hearing. And it did take the full year. So if you've been with us along this journey, it took the full year to get through everything. But really what was coming up for us and what we wanted to dig deeper into was this kind of inherent nature around panelist subjectivity. Also, there were variances in scoring, and that was happening year to year. So if you're familiar with GFO, within the on-year cycle versus off-year cycle, every on year there might be different panelists. So, and also within those years, there's different panels of people, and we were seeing variances in scoring from panel to panel, person to person. So we wanted to address that as well. We also wanted to dig into what was really essential in this process to provide support to you all as grantees for general operating support. And then also what was coming up for us was there's been a substantial growth in this particular program. And then there's also, combined with that, the growing demand and need for general operating support as we know other funding sources have diminished over the years or changed focus. A couple other things within that frame of mind is that there's a lot of technical support for applying organizations. As you heard, there's over 300 organizations that Laura and I are managing, and there's even more coming in this year with these revisions. So we just wanted to address that kind of technical support aspect to make sure we all have capacity to work together. And then the support and management of panelists through this process as well. We see, I think it was 50 panelists last year. So there's a lot of people management as well that we wanted to address. So when we gathered our editors together, we had a group of 10 public editors that went through this process with us. We asked them to kind of consider 3 big questions. What's essential in the GFO process to provide funding to arts organizations? Should there be a role for the public, such as a panelist or another reviewer type of role? And then building off of those 2 ideas, is there a new GFO structure entirely to consider? So those questions really drove the overall revision of the GFO program, resulting in kind of the new process that we're going to share a little bit more on today. So what we ended up hearing, kind of generally speaking, that we were keeping in mind when we were moving through the revision was the editors shared that general information was important to know about an organization through the GFO application. That significant application changes were needed for that on-year or that full application, that big application with the 14+ questions that you all might be familiar with. There was a suggested addition of including goals and benchmarks set by the organization within the application, and then also that financials and organizational attachments remain the same, that was fine. Regarding the public role or the role of the panelist, the editors shared that yes, there is a role for the public in this process. However, there were concerns with consistency of panelists and the reviews from year to year. They also noted that there is value in the public visits with organizations, and there's a connection to those public visits with public dollars. So we really wanted to keep that in mind as well. And then some other elements that came up during the editing process was to consider a compliance model with artistic visits, also removing panel meetings and scoring elements from the process, and to consider a new cycle structure to account for the number of organizations and visits that panelists were experiencing from year to year. So we heard that, and we also wanted to uplift some of these goals of the revised GFO program before we dive into it a little further. But there's kind of two big goals here: to increase equity and accessibility of this program. So thinking about the idea of removal of scoring that helps to eliminate bias, which leads to inequitable reviews of applications, and that more organizations will be eligible for funding through this new process. We also really wanted to focus on simplifying, shortening, and streamlining for everybody here. So we landed on a simpler process overall, and we really want to keep in mind that we want you all to spend less time on the application so you have more time to focus on your organization's work and mission-driven programming. And again, that continues to increase equity and access throughout this process. All right, so I'm going to move into the full application here. There's kind of 5 big sections that we'll walk through. The organization information, which Laura hinted on earlier when she was talking about arts organizations versus arts programs. That section also needs to include a unique entity identifier, or UEI. So just note that that's required. If you don't have it already, just make sure you're in the process of obtaining it. And also note that this is a couple years old now, so just ensure that it's active. So you might want to log into sam.gov where you would have obtained that UEI. So just make sure everything's good there. It's also going to ask for fiscal sponsorship information if that's applicable to your organization. And there's also some new updates within the organizational profile, which again, Laura hinted on, and we'll go into more detail. We'll also talk about the eligibility questions, program details, financials, and those attachments. So within the organizational profile information, this is kind of a new information is being populated within this. So when you log into the application itself, there's going to be a new yellow button that says Edit Org Profile. So it's very clear, it's very exciting. And that's where we want to drive you to make some updates to your organizational profile. There's information that we'll be tracking, but also it's going to pull directly into the application. So that will include contact information, your IRS date, along with your mission, vision, goals, and values. So that's an important shift from the old application being asked every year to just having it in your profile as kind of a standard set of information. And here's what that looks like if you're looking in Smart Simple and completing the application. That yellow button you want to click into, and that's where you will make those updates. Similarly, with the contact information, there's also going to be a yellow button to direct you to the edit profile. So that would be the place where your primary contact would be. So you would just update that contact information if that's necessary. This is the time where if you've had a leadership change, or perhaps your grant writer or development director, somebody moved on, they're no longer with your organization, make sure that's updated. So those automatic updates that Smart Simple might send you about a report, it's going to the right person and not to an incorrect email. So that's what that looks like. And then next, this is also a slightly new section for the GFO program. It's the eligibility section. So there's going to be some kind of quick yes or no questions here, but this really directly connects to the eligibility and compliance of the GFO program. So we're going to ask you, has your organization operated for one full fiscal year? And there's going to be a drop down of yes or no. Is your organization incorporated in Maryland or have a significant physical presence in Maryland? And there's a drop down of 3 choices. Yes, you're incorporated in Maryland. Yes, you have a significant presence in Maryland, or no. And then does your organization have ongoing programs to produce or present the arts to the public? And there is also your yes or no answer. Additionally, in the eligibility section, there's the programming list that we're going to ask you for. This is kind of our new-ish version of the activities chart from the old application. We're asking you to upload a list, no more than 2 pages, of all your public programming in your organization's current fiscal year. In your response, include a brief description of each type of program or event. So this is where we want you to think about kind of those buckets of programming that you have. So if you're doing, 100+ events throughout the year, we do not need you to list the 100+ events. We really want you to focus on the types of programs. So if you have a main stage season, an exhibition series, educational programming, kind of highlighting those big program areas, and also include who the program and event serves. If an activity is tuition or fee-based, so those would be things such as summer camps or classes that are really intended for a closed group or specific age group, for example, we ask that you describe how that activity is serving the community beyond those that are paying to participate. So again, really just looking for a 2-page overview of your annual programming here. Also, when thinking about the programming, we're going to ask, do you anticipate any significant changes to the programming in the next fiscal year? So this is also a yes or no. If you do say yes, that you are going to have significant changes to your programming, we ask for a very brief explanation of what those significant changes that you anticipate. So this would include situations where a type of programming is being added, eliminated, maybe there's a significant increase or decrease in the budget allocation for that program. So really looking at those big shifts, not necessarily those annual changes that you might experience, changing a production or an exhibition. We really want to think about, are you piloting a new program for the first time? Those sorts of things that would impact other areas of the organization. And again, just a brief explanation there is great. For our arts programs, there's a little bit more information we're going to ask of you all, and this will show up for you since you're labeled as an arts program within the organization now, or in Smart Simple now. But we're going to ask you all to include a list of all your programming that your organization offers, whether it's arts-based or not, and within that list indicate what is an arts-based program with an asterisk or some sort of indicator. And then we also will ask you all what percentage of your current fiscal year's operating budget is allocated to your arts-based programming. For our arts programs out there, if you have any questions about what that means for your organization, it's going to be a little bit different for every arts organization, just noting the different types of structures. Be in touch with Laura and myself, and we can talk through that. We're also going to ask you to tell us about your organizational structure and just click the groups that apply to your organization. So if you have a board of directors or with officers or another type of governing body, you click that box. If you have paid staff members such as full-time, part-time, and or contractual work, you want to click next to that. And then if you have volunteers, whether those volunteers are staff members, committees, if you have volunteers in any capacity, you'll want to click that button as well. So that's it for the eligibility section. Then moving into the program details, this is where the big shift happens with the information we're asking of you kind of in this annual context. So the program details section will start with asking you to share up to 5 significant updates and or highlights about your organization from the past fiscal year. So these updates would include significant changes to your mission, visions, and goals, any type of staffing or leadership changes, any changes within your operations or programming or other artistic activities, perhaps your finances had a big update. Within your response, we ask that you include steps the organization has taken to address these changes and any additional details to why these changes occurred. So again, this is kind of looking at your past fiscal year. We want to know about the things that have happened recently, thinking about maybe perhaps since your last application, what would you want to update us on? Also want to note here that we're asking folks to include at least one update, but you can include up to 5. If you're a new organization coming into the program for the first time, or perhaps you were lapsed funding a year or two, you'd perhaps include 3 updates. That really just helps us to get to know you a little bit better as an organization. And just a reminder here as well that if you shared an update in the above section regarding your mission, vision, and goals, make sure you make that update in your organizational profile. So if we see that there was an update there, we want to see the update within that context as well. There's also an optional question here, and that is if you, are there any challenges that you'd like us to know, to be aware of, or ways we can support you or your organization in ways beyond your grant award? So this, again, it's optional. It's just something for that you, if you'd want to let us know something that you're dealing with, we can, kind of think about that. Perhaps it would help lead to professional development that we as the State Arts Council could offer, or other solutions, connections that could be made. The next big section in the program details section is we're asking that you list up to 5 goals or priorities of the organization over the next 5 years. So we're now looking future forward. When you're thinking about these 5 goals or priorities, we want you to keep in mind some indicators of success or ways to measure your goals and or how you would implement those goals or priorities. We're also going to ask that you tell us a time frame for completion. These can really be short-term goals for your organization, long-term goals, a combination of both. It's really up to you. But within the time frame example, you could put something that you want to complete it by the end of fiscal year 26, or perhaps a particular month like April 2026. Maybe you anticipate starting that particular priority in January of 26 and complete it by the end of the calendar year of December 2026. So this doesn't need to be necessarily an elaborate response for the time frame, but just looking for some particular goals or times that are connected with your goals and priorities. When you're thinking about goals and priorities and what you'd want to include, that might be activities that are associated with capacity building, financial, perhaps board and staff development, programmatic development, ways that you're thinking about engaging your audiences and communities maybe in a new way, or perhaps a new initiative or pilot program you're thinking about. And here as well, we're asking that you include at least 1 organizational goal, but you can submit up to 5. And just a note here that with the goals and priorities section, this will later connect to the final report of the application. So as we move forward, I mean, this will be 2 years from now, essentially. Goals don't necessarily need to be completed, but we're just going to ask that you provided details on the progress, whether it's finished, perhaps it changed, some updates happened. The FY27 final report will be due August 15th of 2027. So again, just something to keep in mind that we'll be looking for that update at the end of 2027 when you submit your final report. All right, and then moving into the financial section, this really hasn't changed too much from the previous year. So we're going to ask that you complete a financial table, so entering your income and expenses for your arts organization or your arts program's most recently completed fiscal year. So for most of you, that will be either fiscal year 25 or calendar year 24. For more information about, allowable and non-allowable income and expenses, please refer to the guidelines. There's some pretty big sections that lay out those common allowable and non-allowables. Should you need a spreadsheet template for the financial table, you can always access a copy of that from Laura or myself. We will also be adding that to the website as a resource in the upcoming weeks, so you can look out for that as well. We're also going to ask you in the financial section this year, are there any significant changes within your financial statement from the previous year? Asking that you please share if you've had a 20% surplus or deficit change, significant changes in income sources or unexpected expenses, anything big that would impact your financials that you'd like us to know about. And then within the attachment section, this also hasn't changed too much here, but we'll be asking for an updated and signed Form W-9, your IRS letter of tax determination. And then to connect with your financials, we will be asking for your most recently completed fiscal year financial statement. Again, that should be from fiscal year 25 or calendar year 24 for most of you. If you are under $750,000 in allowable income, we will be looking for a signed profit and loss statement or a similar type of statement to show your income and expenses from that year. If you are over $750,000 in allowable income, we will expect to see an audited financial statement. For our arts programs, you will be asked to submit an additional arts program statement, and that should be reflective of the income and expenses directly associated with your arts programming. And again, if you have any questions about what that looks like, just be in touch with Laura or myself. And then there's an electronic signature there for to authorize everything. All right. And then again here with the financial statements, just to uplift a little bit more here, organizations with allowable income below 750, just again, make sure to submit your most recently completed fiscal year or fiscal year statement signed by a professional accountant or the organization's fiscal officer. This should be, again, a statement showing your income and expenses, such as a profit and loss statement. And just as a note here, because we get this question actually quite often, Form 990 statements are not acceptable financial statements for us. So it's nothing that you need to provide to us in the application or afterwards. So just again, making sure that you have the fiscal year financial statement that just shows your income and expenses that is not a 990. And then again, a little bit more detail for our folks that have income over 750, that the audit needs to be an independent audit prepared by a CPA firm. If your most recently completed fiscal year audit is not finalized at the time of the application deadline on November 15th, let Laura or I know. You actually have a grace period through March 1st of 2026. So again, let us know before the application deadline if you think your audit is going to be delayed. We'd want you to submit a completed application with the financial table. We'll just ask for you to submit with a temporary financial statement. And once you get that audit, we'll have you submit that by March 1st. So again, just be in touch with us so we know to expect that later. And if there's any updates or changes along the way, we can be in touch about it. All right. And then again, arts programs must submit a full organizational statement from your organization or the parent organization along with that arts program statement as well. All right, I'm going to hand it over to Laura. I've just talked a lot there.
That was quite a monologue. You got everything in there. Thanks for sharing all of that, Emily. But hopefully everybody can see that even though that was a lot for Emily to walk through, the bulk of the questions that have to do with the application, they're yes and no questions. So even though Emily had to explain all of them, they're quick. They're drop-down questions with yes and no answers. So hopefully it does move rather quickly for you when you're working through the application itself. So thinking about these next steps for the full application, again, a reminder, we say this a couple of times throughout, you'll see a couple more slides to remind you of this, but all of the applications are going to be due on November the 15th of each year. So there's no longer the on and off years. We only have this one application. Everything that Emily just shared with you, that's the one application, and that new full application is due on November the 15th. So Emily hinted at this a little bit during when she was talking about the revision process, but there is a new panelist role. So something that will be incorporated for the first time into this process this year. So in the past, we had panelists who were asked to review and score all of the written applications. And then the panelists also conducted what we called extension assignments. So that included an artistic activity visit and an in-depth conversation with applicants. All of the work of the panelists, it culminated in a panel meeting, which happened usually in late March or early April of every year. And during that panel meeting, there was a final score that everybody agreed upon, they arrived at for each applicant. And then that score moved forward into the application's funding formula. So panelists are still going to be involved in the review process, but they're going to be involved in a new way. Panelists will be reviewing but not scoring written applications, and they're going to be responsible for completing artistic activity visits. So kind of that one component of the former extension assignments. On the flip side, MSAC staff will be reviewing and also not scoring written applications, and we are going to complete the new in-depth staff conversation. So that's going to sort of take the place of the former in-depth conversations with panelists. So to break that down a little bit further, the artistic activity visit, what that will include is that a public panelist will attend or view a form of public programming, such as, a performance, an exhibit, some kind of event that is an example of your artistic programming from the organization. That artistic activity visit, that's typically going to happen once every 4 years, or as determined by MSAC staff if an organization is put into a 1-year application cycle. The artistic activity visit, this is not a scored component, so that's really important to highlight. It's really intended to show evidence of programming that is open to the public and that aligns with the written application and the organization's mission, vision, and goals. So just as it was before, this has not changed. The artistic activity visit, it is not focused on artistic quality or excellence. That's not being evaluated during this visit. It's really, like I said, it's really looking for that evidence of programming. We're going to share more details on exactly how all of this works and how this will roll out later in the year. But that's going to be one component, and that is how the public will be involved in the review process. And then additionally, there's going to be kind of a shift in the staff role in the review. So MSAC program directors, meaning myself and Emily in this case, we're going to be conducting in-depth conversations as a required part of the application review process. Again, this happens once every 4 years, or as determined by us if an organization is put into a 1-year application cycle. So this is really, it's looking to be just an opportunity for us to have a 30-minute conversation with staff or volunteers or board members from the organization. Usually that comes in the form of staff leadership, your artistic director, your managing director, your executive director, something along those lines, or board members, perhaps a board president or a board treasurer. And we're really focused on organizational and programmatic development, your goals, talking about what is shared in the application. Again, we're going to have more information on this in the coming weeks, and also we'll share exactly how the scheduling of all of this will work, as we will have many, many conversations between Emily and myself. So we'll have very specific directions on how to set all of this up. So like I said, these components, they're not going to happen every single year. In the past, we had a rotating schedule of the on and off years. It was in a 3-year rotation. We're going to be expanding that to a 4-year cycle now and a rotating schedule. So a way, just kind of an example of how that would play out for an organization is here on the screen. So what that might look like is year 1, you would complete the application and the artistic activity visit. Year 2 would just be the application. You don't have anything extra. Year 3 would be the application and staff conversation. And then year 4 would be application only. And then you would cycle back around to year 1. Now, obviously, not everybody can start in year 1. That wouldn't make any sense. So you should have received, if you are a past GFO recipient, you should have received a few weeks ago an email either from myself or Emily sharing with you where you fall in this cycle and what you're going to be expected to do for this particular year. If you haven't read that email, go back. We sent it a couple weeks ago, or we can also share that with you if you don't have it. It's also going to be listed in your application. So just like how it said, if you're an arts organization or arts program in Smart Simple, it also tells you organization X, you're in year 2, you only need to do the application. So all of that's going to be there for you if you have any confusion at all. If you're a new organization, meaning that you completed the intent to apply a few weeks ago and you've now been invited to complete the full application, if you're new, you're going to be completing both the artistic activity visit and the staff conversation in this first review cycle, along with the application itself. Following that, if you're approved for funding, you would then fall into schedule according to your artistic discipline. But for that first year, we need to get all of the information up front, and then you would fall into cycle after that. So here's kind of our breakdown of the cycle schedule by artistic discipline. This is a lot of information. Again, I would say make sure you check your email and check the application itself so you can really see exactly where you're at. But just to quickly run through it, for this coming cycle, if you are an organization that is a dance organization, folk and traditional arts, theater group 1, or visual and media group 1, you would be submitting an application and completing an artistic site visit. If you are a music group 2, a service organization, or visual and media group 2, you would be required to submit an application only. Our literary organizations, our multidiscipline group 1 organizations, and our theater group 2 organizations, they're going to be doing the application and staff conversation. And then finally, multidiscipline group 2 and music group 1 would be doing the application only. Just a little bit more here about those artistic disciplines. So you just heard me say groups 1 and groups 2. Those are artistic disciplines that are really big. We have lots of organizations in those categories. So we have just broken them up. Really, primarily, they're broken up alphabetically. So it doesn't mean anything if you're in group 1 versus group 2. It's just an alphabetical split. And that's just really for our own management, so that way we're able to complete those really large groups. There's also been some artistic disciplines that have merged into larger categories. So we used to have something called Music C, for example. That's now just under the music umbrella. So there's a little bit of change, some different, some nuances. So double check, make sure you have all of that information. If you have questions or you think something's wrong, reach out to us so we can double check all of that. Our plan is that we're going to be sharing separate recordings later this fall about the artistic activity visits and the in-depth conversations. So those separate videos we'll share out with you, and that's really going to talk more about what that includes, the timing for them, how to schedule them, all of that will be broken down, and we'll share that with you later. And again, there's just the note here that all the new organizations, again, you're going to be completing both the artistic activity visit and the in-depth conversation as part of that first cycle. So what the timeline looks like for all of this. So, well, it says October 9th. That's probably when we made this slide. But today, actually, October 9th is when the application opened within Smart Simple. So that was a couple of days ago. You should have received an email that said that it was open. And on October 9th, we also sent out the intent to apply notifications to our new folks. So at that point, everything was open. Again, highlighted in red here, November 15th, that is the GFO deadline. So all applications are due at that point. Moving into the winter time, really from January through the end of April, that's the time period where we're going to be reviewing your applications and your financials. And in that same time period, that's when the panelists and Emily and myself will be completing the assigned site visits and in-depth conversations. So it's a much larger window of time. In the past, we were really doing those artistic activity visits and those pieces. That was really happening in like February, early March. Now we're looking at a full 4-month period. So much longer window of time there. Once we move into May and June, that's when recommendations for funding are made by the council, or to the council by myself and Emily, and the grant amounts are determined based on our budget that we receive from the state. Once we officially move into FY27, which would be after July 1st, that's when the notifications of all FY27 GFO grants are sent via Smart Simple. And in August 15th, the FY26 final reports are due. So that's going to be the previous year's fiscal year reports. Just a reminder of how that works is we need to review and approve your previous fiscal year's final reports before we can move forward with any processing of the FY27 disbursements. So there's that kind of, we need to finish off the last fiscal year before we move into the into FY27. So that's how that process works. And then ongoing throughout the entire thing, we're here to answer questions. We're here to provide any kind of support that you need. We're happy to meet with you, your staff, your board, etc. So reach out to us anytime. All right, Emily's going to break down the funding formula here and also share a bit more about Smart Simple.
Great. Thanks again, Laura. We're coming down the home stretch, folks. But this is an important piece to really understand how we determine the GFO awards from year to year. So we've always used a funding formula that has included 3 variables. We are looking at the total allowable income, multiply that by a panel score, and multiply that by cap allocation percentage to get your grant award. So again, this is the kind of the previous formula that has been used, that's been used for a while. The total allowable income, that's provided by you all, by the organization within the annual application, based on the updated financials that we get year to year. So that financial table that we talked about in the financial statements, that's really important because we're looking for the total allowable income to drop into the funding formula. The panel score percentage, that had always been determined through the on-year application review process that happened every 3 years. And the cap allocation percentage, that's really determined by our grants for organization budget, which is an allocation within the overarching MSAC budget from year to year. And it's also based on the tier of your organization or your budget size, which we'll get into a little bit more here. So an example here at the bottom. Moving forward, we're going to continue to use a funding formula, but it's been revised since the revision process. So we're actually removing the panel percentage from the formula. So we will just have the total allowable income multiplied by the cap allocation percentage to get your grant award. Again, we're going to continue to get those updated total allowable income numbers from you all within the annual application based on, again, those updated financial statements that are provided to cross-check the financial table to get to your total allowable income, and then also the cap allocation percentage, which again is based on our budget and by the tier. So we're just left with 2 variables here that we're looking for. In particular, we wanted to highlight the cap allocation percentage because this is really that kind of moving variable from year to year, and there's a couple different things going on here. We've been in also a change with the cap allocation percentage. We call that the equitable funding formula because there's been a shift based on a previous revision process, that we are kind of set up these tiers based on the size of your organization. So you'll see the tiers here on your screen. Tier 1 are organizations that are between $10,000 and $500,000 in allowable income. It was previously $50,000 when the threshold was that number. So those are our smallest organizations. Tier 2 are organizations between $500,000 and $1.5 million. Tier 3 are a mid-size between $1.5 and $5 million. Tier 4 are organizations between $5 and $10 million, and Tier 5 are organizations that are over $10 million. So we established these tiers about 4-ish years ago. We are moving into kind of a year 4 of 5 of a transition period with this cap allocation percentage as well. So we've been doing kind of a slow shift in the cap allocation percentages. There's also been some priorities connected to the funding formula here too. So as we noted, there was a previous revision of implementing kind of these tiers and shifts in the cap allocation percentage. We also are shifting towards a cap amount that no one organization can get over $1.1 million moving into FY27. And in year 5, the final year, we're essentially capping the awards at $1 million. We're also looking at kind of these transition priorities of moving everybody from the same cap allocation to splitting among those 5 tiers. So as we move through this over a 5-year transition point, we also are keeping in mind that our Tier 1 organizations, those are our smallish organizations, that we're increasing their cap allocation percentage at a faster rate over 5 years. Tier 2, we're looking at increasing their cap allocation percentage over the course of 5 years. Tier 3, we're looking at keeping your cap allocation percentage about the same or stable. And tiers 4 and 5, those are our largest organizations. We're actually looking to decrease their cap allocation percentage, but not at a rate that's greater than 1.5%. So again, this is stuff that Laura and I get to math about as we're determining funding formulas year to year. And there's a lot of things that are kind of happening in the background, but these are just some priorities we've been keeping in mind over the past few years, and we'll shift and change a little bit as we remove that panel percentage as well from the formula. With that in mind, we are really trying to ensure that as we make these changes, in particular, removing the scoring panel percentage variable, we want to make sure that our funding is stable, to really support our organizations during this time. So we're going to implement kind of a phase out schedule. So these will be for our organizations that have been in the GFO program for a bit. And so if you went through the process in FY26, you received funding in FY26, the current fiscal year, we're actually going to be phasing out based on the score that you got in your last on year, or what was implemented in FY26. So if you basically scored over 90% in your last on-year application, your score is going to be removed in FY27. So you're essentially rounding up to 100. For those that scored between 80 and 89, we're going to round you up to 90%. And then the next year, you would essentially phase out, so in 2 years. And then for our organizations that scored between a 70 and 79%, we're going to phase you out in 3 years here. So you'll be rounded up to an 80%, then a 90%, and then 100%, essentially removing the panel score. So again, this is really an effort to help stabilize our organizations in the whole pool of the GFO funding. Some other things that we're also going to implement, any large organizations, so our tier 4 and 5, so any organization coming in at over $1 million in allowable income as a new organization. So not our current tier 4 and 5, anyone coming in for the first time as a new organization between FY27 and 29 would have what we are going to call in a phase-in process to the funding formula. Again, this is an effort just to make sure folks are stabilized within the program, and it's not going to kind of have a big uptick or dip for any particular organization. So again, here's similar idea, but in the reverse, that if a new organization at that higher level comes in, they would be eligible for 70% in FY27, 80% in FY28, and 90% in FY29. And phased in essentially by FY30. Again, that's just our large organizations coming in. A couple other things that will shift and change here. Previously, all GFO grants had a required 3-to-1 cash match. And that actually excluded funds or services from the state or any in-kind contribution. So again, this match was really checked by Laura and myself during final reports. During the revision process, our editors brought up the idea of some changes. So there's a little bit of a shift here. So we're going to have 2 different types of match requirements. They're tier 1 and tier 2 organizations. Those are our smallest organizations that are less than 1.5 million in total allowable income. Your match requirement will change to 1-to-1 cash match. Our larger organizations in tiers 3, 4, and 5, so allowable income of 1.5 and higher, your match will remain the same at a 3-to-1 cash match. So again, funds or services from the state of Maryland, any in-kind contributions or donated services are not used as part of that match. So we're really looking for any other cash contributions there. Again, this is checked at the final report. And then I think we're going to wrap up with just some quick, smart, simple things. And I know there's some questions in the chat we'll try to get to as well. But just a reminder, Smart Simple is our grants platform. You can find that at marylandarts.smartsimple.com or many of the program pages on our website. As an applicant, you will need to register in Smart Simple. All should be registered already if you've received GFO or you've gone through the intent to apply process. So you'll just want to log in. Just a reminder, this is what your login page looks like. So you'll put in your email and your password and log in. If there are any organizations on here who might be new to this process, you'd want to click the register button. But again, if you're in the GFO program, you should already have an account set up for your organization. To find the GFO application, you're going to click, after you log in, you'll come to your dashboard. Under My Applications, you'll see the opportunities listed. There's probably going to be more than 2 opportunities for you right now, but you'll click into whatever that number says, and it will pull up a listing of opportunities. You're going to look for the Grants for Organization application here, and then there's the Apply Now button next to it. And it'll say full application next to it. So again, it's the GFO Apply Now, and you'll want to open that up. If you happen to be an organization that's coming in for the first time and your intent to apply was already approved, your application is already sitting there in your in progress folder. So it's already transitioned to a draft for you. So if you're a new organization, you actually do not need to do this step. This is for our organizations who've been in the program. Your draft will be under in progress from your dashboard. Once you get into your application, you'll want to make sure to click Save Draft. That'll essentially activate your whole application for you and walk through all of those the sections here that we mentioned. Also note that, and we've said this before, the system does auto save now, but just to be on the safe side, we always recommend hitting Save Draft just to make sure it is indeed saving. And a few things to highlight here. I believe this is going to be the last of our info sessions before the application deadline, but we know there's a lot of information that's been shared today and in previous sessions. So Laura and I are actually going to hold some specific office hours just for the GFO process. So if you have more questions that are coming up or thoughts around your application as you continue to fill it out, These were sent to you in an email already, the direct Google Meet links, but just to note, they're going to be held on Friday, October 31st at 10 a.m., Thursday, November 6th at 2 p.m., and Friday, November 14th at 10 a.m., so the day before the deadline. So again, this is an informal space for us to gather together and address any questions that are coming up for you along the way. They're not going to be recorded sessions, so we're not going to share out any kind of recording afterwards. No registration is required. It's just kind of that idea to pop in if you've got a question. So again, these should be sitting in your inbox if you get our regular emails from Laura or myself with those reminders. All right, so I think we have a few minutes, about 15 minutes for questions. I know there's been a lot of questions in the chat, and I think I mentioned we could address some of them in the Q&A, but I don't know, Laura, is there anything you want to uplift from the top here?
Yeah, let me scroll back. I think we got a lot of them answered. Let me see if I can find where.
And Kathy, I think I told you to vocalize if you don't mind. So if you want to go ahead.
We're a new application, so I was wondering what the difference was between the programming list and then you had on the eligibility to list all program and designate what's arts programming, because I think we'd have a lot of overlap there. So I'm not sure what distinction you're looking for there.
Let me make sure I'm understanding. So in the 2-page requirement where it's listing all of your programming, you just want to list those kind of buckets of your arts programming?
Yeah, but then you have another section, you said there will be another list of all programming and highlighting what's arts programming. So how
so if you're designated an arts program, so I'm not sure what organization you're with, Kathy, sorry, but
it's a music organization.
Okay, so you would be considered an arts organization. So you would just list all of your activities and buckets of programming. It's only for our organizations that we are considered an arts program. So for example, if you're a non-arts organization, a non-arts community center, for example, but you have significant arts programming that we're supporting through GFO, we'd want to know all of the programming that's happening under that organization's umbrella, but just indicate what's arts, so we get an idea of what percentage is arts programming. So okay, that's something that if you're not an arts program, you don't have to worry about.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up.
All right, so I'm scrolling through the chat here, and forgive me if I have missed anything. There's a lot of back and forth, but I did see a question about our panelists paid a stipend. Yes, panelists are paid a stipend for their work for all of our programs, but also including the GFO work. So they will be paid for their artistic activity visits. I believe that we have addressed the different financial statement questions that were in the chat earlier. And also, there were some questions about the slides and the recording. Both will be made available on the website. It takes us just a day or two to process everything and get everything posted, but we will share that on the website. We will also send out emails with that information as well.
I know there was a question from Nicholas. Did we get to that one? Regarding highlights of the past fiscal year, is that the most recently completed fiscal year or the ongoing fiscal year as the application? So we would be looking for your past fiscal year. So for example, if you're on a traditional fiscal year, we're currently in FY26 right now, so we'd be looking for your FY25, or if you're on a calendar year, we'd be looking for calendar year 24. So really thinking about your programming and how that ties to, perhaps your financial statement. Of course, if there's an update that has happened in between those kind of timeframes, we're nearing the end of calendar year 25 and into FY26 already, please go ahead and tell us. There's a little bit of grace there. If there's an update, we definitely want to know about it, since perhaps your last application or something that you really want to uplift so we know about it.
We have a question here from Elliot asking about the programming narrative question. Mentioned discussing how a program serves a specific constituency, like a summer camp benefits those not in that constituency. So Elliot, this is specifically looking at tuition-based programming. So for example, for your summer camps, we're looking for ways in which that programming is serving beyond those who pay to go to that summer camp. So that might be ways that you're engaged, that summer camp might be engaging more largely with the public. Is there, and I'm just making things up here, but, is there a performance that's occurring at the local library that other people could attend, and see? That is not, the parents and the family members of those paying to participate in that camp. Other ways might be things like scholarships that you're offering for individuals to participate in that tuition-based programming. Ways that you're engaging people who might not be able to pay that tuition. Really thinking about the public more largely and how you're serving beyond those who are paying to take that particular class, summer camp, workshop, etc. Hopefully that helps. It's similar. There has been that same kind of question has been in the activities chart in the previous iteration of the GFO application for several years now. So it's kind of it's the same information actually, just in a slightly different format.
And I see, Nicholas, your response, that makes sense. Melanie, that's a good question. As a university or even our government entities, you wouldn't necessarily have a date for your 501c3 exemption. I would say perhaps as on behalf of a university, you could put in a date, say perhaps when the university was founded. That would certainly be fine, but not required if that's not something that you have as in terms of your organizational structure.
There's also a question here about how long do we have to fulfill the match requirements. Essentially, you're going to have the fiscal year of that the funding is associated with. So that is something that we check in the final report that you would submit in August of each year. With that final report, you're sharing a financial statement from the completed fiscal year that shows the grant, the use of the grant. So if you're awarded $5,000 through GFO, we would see that within that financial statement, and that's where we're looking for that cash match. It's something that we do. We do it now. You might not know that we do this, but that's something that we do throughout the final report review. So that happens now currently, and then it's going to keep happening. That part doesn't really change. The review part of it doesn't change. Just the amount, either 1-to-1 or 3-to-1, changes slightly depending on the size of your organization.
Yeah, good questions. Elizabeth is asking, is there a place in Smart Simple to see all the emails you've sent our organization? I don't believe there is a way from your end, but typically when we're referring to emails that we send, Laura and I have our own distribution list of contacts from our organizations. So if we send an email that kind of is reminders of application deadline, or there's changes, or there's an information session, or something else wider that we want to share, it's coming from us personally. So I hope that helps. There's automated emails that are sent to your primary contact in Smart Simple, and those are usually report reminders. If you've been approved for funding and need to sign a grant agreement form, those sorts of things. But if you're hearing from Laura and myself, that's a separate listing. So if there's anything you want us to check for you, Elizabeth, just let us know.
Just seeing this question here from Ben, who asked, just to confirm the cash match, the shift from 3-to-1 to 1-to-1 for tier 1 organizations will apply to the final report for FY27 and not the upcoming final report for FY26. Yes, so that will take effect with the FY27 applications and the final report that's associated with FY27 funding. So so not the ones we're currently reviewing and not next summer's. All of these fiscal years get a little complicated, so we're always happy to walk through that too.
And it also comes down to when we publish our guidelines, so that information, you know, it shifts, and we try to keep things that are updated within the guidelines in that particular cycle and fiscal year. And Davika, I see your question here. Should we base our funding request in part on how much we think we can match? Just a reminder that this is formula based, so you are not requesting a specific amount. So it's really based on your financials that you submit in your application. You'll break down your income and expenses into allowables and non-allowables. And once you're in there, you'll get it. And I know this is the first time you're completing this, so we can work together. So it's a formula. So again, you don't need to worry about that request or the match up front. And we'll also say that most of the time you all don't know about it because you're typically meeting the match. So it's very few organizations that don't meet this, but it's something that we have to put in the guidelines and make sure everyone's aware of.
We have a question here from Linda. This is a good question. Does receipt of general operating support funding deny an organization from application to any other MSAC program funding? That's a really good question, Linda. Yes and no. There are some things that once you are funded by the GFO program, you would no longer be eligible for. That includes the creativity grant, which some of you are making that kind of transition right now from the creativity grant funding to the GFO program. Once you are funded by the GFO program, you would no longer be eligible for project-based support through the creativity grant in the future. There are a few other very specific instances where you probably wouldn't even be eligible for, certain other programs. I'm thinking about things like our arts and entertainment districts, our county arts development. Those are very specific programs that are looking at very specific types of organizations. So you wouldn't be eligible for them anyway if you're being supported through GFO. But you can still apply for some of the other funding opportunities, such as professional development opportunity grants, the touring grants, arts and education grants. What else am I forgetting? Arts Capital in some, there's some other eligibility things around that. So there are some that you can still, receive the general operating support and then also receive those specifics as well. We can double check if you're questioning anything, if you're thinking about applying for anything, we can certainly double check that for you before you submit anything, just so you don't complete something and then find out it's not eligible.
Yeah, all good questions here. And I see Diane says, is it too late to apply to be a panelist? No, if you're interested in becoming a panelist, for the GFO program, that application is open through October 31st. And if you're interested in other panelist positions for perhaps some other programs, there's kind of ongoing opportunities throughout the year. They pop up before a program director needs panelists in place. So a lot of times you'll see multiple opportunities over the summer. So if you want to kind of get familiar with maybe another group of grantees and in a different program, there's something. But Laura just dropped the link into the ways to get involved page on the website. And yes, Karen, the professional development grant is open. It opened a bit late, but it's open.
Yes, we finally did get to open that just recently. So we're excited to have that again. And just to tag in about the panelist service, a lot of times people ask, or assume, that because they're associated with an organization in the GFO program, they can't serve as a panelist, but you absolutely can. That is not a problem. Obviously, we would take, conflicts of interest into account. We wouldn't assign you to something that you are, a board member with or associated with. But you can absolutely be, a GFO panelist and also be from a GFO funded organization. So definitely consider that. We need a lot of panelists. We have a lot of site visits that need to happen. And we think it's really going to be an exciting opportunity to be able to really go out and experience arts programming across the state.
And Karen, it opened, sorry, going back to the PED grant, it opened a month or so ago. But I'd recommend going to that particular page of the website to get some updates and details. And if you have any questions about your particular opportunity, just be in touch with us offline. We're happy to help you there. All right. Well, we've got about 1 minute left here, so I think that's plenty of time to express our gratitude for you all sticking with us for 90 minutes here to go through the GFO program. Really appreciate the support and the feedback we've been getting along the way for the rollout of this application as well. As you've heard from us time and time again, we are here to help you along the way. So do not hesitate to reach out if you've got any questions. We encourage you to come to those office hours we mentioned. You might hear some things from some other folks that might be having some similar questions or thoughts. So jump into those if you're feeling that you need some more support. And of course, if you need some one-on-one support, we're here to help you along the way as well. I think that's it. Thanks again. And Laura, anything else from you?
No, just thank you so much, everyone. And we're excited to see your applications.
Yeah, great. All right. Have a great afternoon, folks.